Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate. We're looking at how the rest of Europe is watching this election that's unfolding in France. With us from Sciences Po, Jacques Rupnik. Welcome back, Director of Research at the French Political Science Institute, former German ambassador to NATO and diplomatic advisor to former Chancellor Helmut Kohl. Joachim Bitterlich, welcome back. Hi. Sophie Rauser on the staff of the European Parliament's United Left Bloc, which is the bloc of French eliminated far-left candidate Jean-Luc Mélenchon, and Peter Kleppe of the Open Europe think tank. Welcome back to all of you. Just before the break, Sophie Rauser, we were asking you about Marine Le Pen's policies when it comes to getting rid, eventually, she wants, of the euro. What do you think of the common currency? Is it something to keep or something to get rid of?
I mean, it's not only the common currency, it's also the ECB policy, the European Central Bank policy. But of course, I mean, it is a challenge, actually, the way the common currency is working currently. I mean, even the institution, Jacques Delors, for example, is saying that we are probably moving towards a new economic crisis. So there are some risks. What we are saying is that we need to consider seriously those risks and propose some alternative route for that single currency. The option of a common currency is one of them that needs to go along with a deep reform of the ECB. One major change could also be in the ECB to apply some rules for employment targets. That could be an example.
All right, so Peter Kleppe, let me get you in on this. You heard Sophie there. She says, keep the common currency, but deeply reform the European Central Bank. You agree?
Well, I think at least you could improve the functioning of the ECB. At the moment, it's really there to create ever more money. Basically, the idea is to make debt cheap, to make sure that countries, banks can go into debt easily, so to paper over the enormous debt burden that European sovereigns, that European banks face. So I think that's not a good thing, because of course, if you create a lot of easy money, then savers, consumers, they are the victims of that. So they are basically paying for the lack of reform at the political level, at the banking level.
But is the euro a good idea?
Specifically with regards to, I don't think that the euro is a good idea. The euro has, first of all, upset relations between France and Germany. Relations are less good than before the euro. This is, of course, not only because of the euro, but the euro played a role because the euro has enabled France and the French political class not to implement competitiveness reforms, and as a result of that, the French economy has been suffering. Of course, the question is, how do you unwind the euro? How do you get rid of it? That's a very difficult question. I don't think, to be honest, it is possible to do it in an orderly way. I think even if politicians want it, that the electorates will refuse to do so. We can see that now with Le Pen. People obviously don't want to endanger their savings. So I'm afraid that the way it will end is at some point that Germany will say that the bailout burden is too high and that they will move to their own currency. So I think the full political decision for the end of the euro lies with Germany, not with France.
Jacques Rupnik.
Well, it is interesting how the question of the euro has come to be a major theme in the French election. Tomorrow there is a debate, and I hope very much that that question will be...
the only candidates debate in this runoff campaign.
Yeah, there are two candidates, and one of them first said, we pull out of euro. Now she's saying, well, maybe we'll have two currencies, euro for external economic relations, and in France there will be the franc. Total confusion, and what people understand...
A total illusion.
Total illusion, confusion and illusion. And therefore, you don't need to be a great economist to understand that the shift from euro to the franc, the estimates vary between 20 and 30% devaluation. On your savings, on your debt, you just calculate what it means. So Le Pen used to use Europe as the politics of fear. you're free. Europe is responsible for your unhappiness. Now, the euro and the exit from Europe is becoming her Achilles heel. She is now scaring people with this policy, so the fear has shifted.
But when you hear Peter Klepper saying that, well, the creation of the euro has just been a way for the French to kick the can down the road when it comes to their own debt, what do you answer to that?
Well, if it was just the French, it would you could think this is a local aberration. It was a true case for the Greeks, for the Italians, for a number of countries. Indeed, this was something that had to be addressed. And you have really now two views about the future of the euro. I think Emmanuel Macron is basically a way of saying to the Germans, France will become credible if it does some homework, if it does certain reforms, starting with the labor market, and it will become again a credible partner. Germany, on the other side, will have to make a step towards some form of mutualization of the debt. That may be a compromise for the long-term future. But to make a compromise, you have to first establish the credibility in France. If that were not to happen, if we had Le Pen as president, well, basically, it's not just the end of euro. It will be the end of the EU as we know it.
The open borders, we had a story this week in Politico where they talked about the fact that they've just extended the tramway line in Strasbourg to the German side of the border. Except on the German side of the border, you have 3% inflation. On the 3% unemployment, excuse me. On the French side, you have 10% unemployment, and there's worry that the extension of this tramway line will upset the balance in the economies of the two cities on both sides.
Well,
Joachim Bitterlich, the euro, was it perhaps a half-baked idea? And right now, European integration, where does it stand at this point?
The euro has been a good idea, has been working well in the beginning, as long as all the partners were following the basics, the common agreed basics. And then we had a certain period where some of them suddenly had to see that their economic model did not work anymore, or that they were at an over-debt situation. And these states did react slowly because at the same time we had the banking, the financial and the economic crisis from 2007 on. And all, let's say, the reform measures were delayed for some time. I think Macron is right to say, well, we will do our homework, but on the other side, we expect Germany helping us. What a German newspaper called La France de nos mérites, the France of our merits. As a Frenchman said in 1945 about Germany, we will have the Germany of our merits. And this time I think Mrs. Merkel is totally aware that to some extent she will have to help Emmanuel Macron in his economic and financial policy in order to stabilize him, in order to help him to bring about step by step the necessary reforms of the French system. She knows this because Germany needs a strong French partner. I don't think it will be mutualization of the debt as one of the first steps. There are other steps imaginable in this Franco-German or in this European system. By the way, I'm not happy neither about the policy of the ECB, but I've been asking now for the last 2 years to all the scientists of all sides, please tell me what are the feasible alternatives for the ECB in the given situation with the banking crisis still going on in different countries and with the financial crisis of certain
You say you're
states.
not happy with the ECB. The Germans want to tighten the credit right now.
You have open success in Ireland. You have a certain success coming up in Spain and in Portugal, for surprise. You have a weak situation in Italy, yes, but the Italians have always, let's call it, muddling through in the European system. And our real weak partner today, which we'll have to reform, is France. And there, I think Mrs. Merkel is putting her confidence into Emmanuel Macron. Labor reforms.
They had a labor reform bill. It created the big stink here.
A reformat, if you want. Flexibility. I give you one example. Why the hell in the border regions, you mentioned Strasbourg and Kiel, we are not able to set up a common labor market in this region in order to work more together. Why are the border regions not able to set up a common policy for infrastructure, for future implantation of industry, etc.? Why we are not able? Why the hell Paris is sticking to this? Why we can't do this at a regional level in order to help us mutually? These are hard regions within Europe on the German-French border. And why we are not able to do so? I think we have to be reflective on our systems, more decentralized, much more down to earth, down to, for example, labor. Apprenticeship is one of the strong subjects of the Germans. Why the French cannot introduce this much more in order to help against youth unemployment? Why aren't we able to do more on the Erasmus side with regard to students and young people to help them? This is my question.
Sophie
And
Rauser?
therefore we have to de-bureaucratize to some extent France, first of all. It's extremely important. Macron has done as economic minister first steps, but what I call timid first steps. But up till now, the French system is avoiding it.
Sophie Rauser, do you agree that France needs a lot more reform, especially to stamp out youth unemployment? There has to be more opportunity, more job training, less red tape?
Well, yes. What job creation are we talking about? Do you really believe that the current labour reform that has been put in place by Macron and his friend Myriam El Khomri, did it really create a job? Like, can you prove that with figures more than a few hundreds? And compare it to the cost it has been for the most fragile parts of the population. On what has been said a bit earlier, I don't think Germany needs a French partner. I think Germany needs to be compelled to have a French partner, not only for the benefits of the French population, but also to the benefits of Greece, for example. I mean, how can you expect to have a better solution for Greece? I mean, we are still talking about the debt restructuration since the summer 2015 now. Where is this debt relief? Did it come from, did we hear France? What guarantees do we have that Macron will stand against Schäuble and Merkel in that Greek crisis and in the southern economy that are deeply touched still by the austerity cuts that have been run for so long? So I think this is, to come back to a more French point of view, I think if Macron really wants to be elected, he needs to give clear guarantees to the French population. I mean, he cannot continue insulting, for example, our 7 million voters. We need more concrete, good reasons to vote for him beyond that pretty face and good PR.
Jacques Rupnik?
Well, I beg to disagree. Macron has not insulted anybody. He will not capitulate in the midst of a campaign and say, I abandon my program simply because I hope that some of Mr. Mélenchon's voters may vote for me. No, that I think would be the way to show he's not fit for being a president. You have a main course, you have a few main items in your program, and you try to rally people around them. When I heard that he's presented as being extreme market against extreme right, Macron extreme right? No, he's a left of center, let's say liberal with a social conscience, with a welfare state, with all the provisions that it entails. You wanted a real liberal free market here? That would have been Fillon. He wanted radical market reforms, kind of Thatcher type. So, in fact, and he was also the only candidate who was speaking about the debt. You know, the French have a debt of 100% of the GDP. You know, Mélenchon.
Macron doesn't speak of it either?
Well, he speaks of it, but he doesn't.
Not the way Fillon did.
But not the way Fillon did, and others simply ignore it. Mélenchon, Le Pen, all of them ignore totally that France has 1,000 billion debt. You know, and that what's the solution? Well, print more money. No, I don't. I think Macron is proposing something of a reform that is necessary here, not for the sake of the Germans, not for the sake of Europe, but for the sake of France, to reform France. Germany did it in the last 15 years. Since the Schröder reforms all the way to today, Germany reformed itself. Remember that 15 years ago, there were articles written all over Europe about Germany as a sick man of Europe. If Germany could have done it, well, why not France? And
in its way,
yeah.
In its way, not necessarily a copy of a German way. Do it in their way.
One final, because we're running short on time, I want to go around the table on this issue, which is Brexit. We've seen the media storm that's been created by the fact that Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung had leaked bits of that Wednesday night dinner between Jean-Claude Juncker and Theresa May at Downing Street, where the president of the European Commission came out saying that, well, the British seem unprepared for the Brexit negotiations. I'll start with you, Jacques Rupnik. How will the next French president handle these Brexit negotiations, and what role for France going forward as regards to the balance of power in Europe as it's shifting?
Well, first of all, let's just remember that nobody in France wished for a Brexit. Nobody wished it.
Nor in Germany. Nor in Germany.
Nor in Germany. The French consider that it is important, precisely because of the slightly lopsided relationship between France and Germany, that Britain is there. Britain decided to leave. Then the question is, if you leave without any consequences, or very minor consequences, well, what is the signal you're sending to the rest of Europe? This is just a recipe for disaggregation. So,
the British say you'd be cutting off your nose to spite your face, that therefore, both sides stand to lose if the negotiation gets too difficult.
But therefore, the best paper I've seen in the last years from Brussels is the directives of negotiation of the 27 with Britain, concluded on the 29th of April by the European Council. And the British are not yet prepared to such a negotiation, I think, because the negotiation with its three parts, extremely well done in strategy and even in tactics, I think. And Mrs. May is not prepared at all till now to such a negotiation, which will have an extremely negative input for Britain in the longer run. And she is not yet prepared, especially on that side, for example, about Ireland.
Peter Klepper, let me bring you in on this. How do you see these Brexit negotiations going, and what role for France in a post-Brexit world?
I don't think first of all, the negotiations, I don't think they're not going bad. First of all, the EU and Britain have to agree the terms of the exit. So, and there's, I would say, almost agreement there. The most contentious point is, can the EU citizens stay in Britain? And Theresa May has said, yes, we're more than happy to guarantee that, at least when the EU guarantees that the British citizens can stay in Europe. So that's almost done. There's some technical issues about social security rights and so on. Then secondly, there's of course the issue of the money. The EU has leaked it wants Britain to pay 63 billion. Britain ideally wants to pay 0, but has already said it's happy to pay something to keep friendly relations. So they end somewhere in the middle. The real tricky point, however, may be to agree Britain's status after the exit in only 2 years' time. That is a very short time period, but there are solutions for that. Some kind of a transitional agreement could be arranged. Now, one particular problem is that many in Brussels and many in the member states think that it's only logical that Britain, that its new deal, that it won't be as good as the deal it has as an EU member. I don't think this should be so obvious, because if you say that Britain should get a somewhat worse deal, then you're basically saying that there should be trade disruption, there should be trade restrictions between the UK and mainland Europe. And of course, this is going to hurt Britain, but it is also going to hurt mainland Europe.
So let me bring in Sophie Rauser, because we're almost out of time.
How on earth would the EU become more popular?
Sophie Rauser, how should the next French president handle Brexit negotiations?
Well, it's pretty too early to say, probably, but I think even Macron would be in favor of a common position here in the European institutions, saying that you should guarantee that you know, the full liberties within the common market is a block. So I think that that's going to be. I'm not sure. We heard Macron precisely on the subject, but I think he's going to defend that. It's going to be. I'm more concerned, you know, with the Labour future, to be honest, you know. And I think the anticipated election will be very terrible for Labour, because their position on the European Union hasn't been very clear on what they want really. But another point I just wanted to say earlier, when Jacques Rupnik was talking, because I read his book when I was at university a couple of years now back. It's very funny that he was pointing the example of Germany for the economic policy that France should apply, because these policies in Germany decades ago, well, currently now you have 11 million poor workers in Germany. So is this the future we want for France? I'm not really sure. I know Macron has a very new, fresh face, but actually it's a very, very old politics he's recommending. All
right, the argument's not over. Sophie Rauser, I want to thank you for joining us from Brussels. I want to thank Peter Kleppe as well. Joachim Bitterlich, Jacques Rupnik, please stay with us. Media Watch is next. And we say hello to Emma James.
Hi there.
A lot of talk about that, should we call it a tribute that Marine Le Pen did to eliminated Conservative candidate François Fillon? A lot of people saying it's plagiarism, right? Her May Day
Absolutely.
speech.
Well, people are calling it a lot of things. Plagiarism, a tribute, a wink, a nod. Or could it just have been a publicity stunt? We just don't know, because Marine Le Pen may have had anything.
It may have been on purpose.
It's a possibility, because, of course, it has ensured...
I see Joachim Bitterlich nodding his head.
Purpose,
everybody is talking about it.
Right.
If she had quoted François Fillon and name-checked him, yes, it would have been a big story that she's quoting François Fillon, but it wouldn't have got anywhere near the amount of attention that it has done. Now, some cartoonists are portraying it as she's morphing into some kind of Fillon-esque Le Pen hybrid creature. And obviously that's...
So these are Fillon's eyebrows.
Exactly,
okay.
The infamous eyebrows of François Fillon. Right. And certainly that's what she's hoping to do. She wants to appeal to those people who voted for François Fillon, but who are still balking at the idea of voting for a National Front candidate. This is a similar image where they've created a hybrid of the two. It's really quite a frightening image, to say the least. Now, other people are saying that it's a question of schoolboy copying a la Mr. Bean. Other reactions online. The Local says that's one way of trying to win over Fillon's voters. And certainly that may have been the case. It may have been about getting publicity. This Twitter user is pointing out that it didn't do Donald Trump any harm when his wife plagiarised Michelle Obama. She says, as to the accusations of plagiarism, Le Pen should have responded, François and I were raised with so many of the same values that you work hard. And, of course, that was the speech that Melania Trump famously gave, but it had already been given once by Michelle Obama. Now, Libération, the left-wing newspaper, talks about this, saying that what was supposed to be a key speech has now become a subject of ridicule. But they point out it is only 2 weeks since François Fillon uttered these words in a campaign rally. So it does seem almost improbable, I would say, that she didn't realise, or that whoever furnished her with that script didn't realise where those words had been said before. As for the official reaction from the Front National, they say this was not a case of plagiarism. They say it was a kind of tribute, a wink or a nod to François Fillon, or as one of them put it, a small loan. Interesting to bring money into it. I'm not sure if that was supposed to be a joke. But
university students get in big trouble if they do this kind of tribute without
Absolutely.
quoting their source.
Anyway. What they believe is that this will have been understood and appreciated by Fillon's voters. And, of course, that's what they'll be hoping. 7.2 million votes were cast for the candidate of Les Républicains, and between a quarter and a third of them have said that they are likely to vote Marine Le Pen.
Emma, do we know who was first to spot these similarities?
Well, certainly the first to really publicise it widely was this Ridicule TV. They put together this minute-and-a-half comparison of the two speeches. When I saw it last night, I did have question marks in my mind. Was this genuine? What they have said is that they haven't manipulated it at all, other than to slightly alter the tempo of the speeches in order to have the words coming at exactly the same time to make the plagiarism all the more obvious. And it is that manipulation that made me slightly question it yesterday. And it's when you look at their actual Twitter account as well, it's easy to see why people might think this is fake news. It's clearly certainly poking fun at Emmanuel Macron. In fact, up until now, as reported by L'Express, their favoured target has been Emmanuel Macron. They are fervent supporters of François Fillon. They very much had directed a lot of their jokes, their insults, their embarrassing videos at Emmanuel Macron, and it has surprised some that they've now turned on Marine Le Pen. What is interesting to note, though, is that on the Decoder's website for Le Monde, where you can check how trustworthy a site is, they say that this one regularly relays false news, warning its readers to be vigilant and cross-check any stories they see from Ridicule TV with other outlets. But on this case, we now know that they did get it right.
Oh, they got it right this time. Emma James, many thanks. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.